1, 2, 3. 1, 1, 1. Masha, I want to be on the stage as well.
Who? The girls, yes.
No, I want to be with them on the...
Well,
the
maybe
front.
not all the time. When
Okay.
they are playing, yeah. At the beginning, I will be here. I will have 2 mics.
3.
Do you want to grab some water, Masha?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Good. Right. It's wonderful to see you all. Can you hear? Yeah? We are delighted to have this event with this wonderful title, Staging Russia, because we do lots of events related to Russia in this building, but they are not about staging it. And today we are celebrating several things, and I'll talk about it in a moment, but I would like first of all to introduce my 2 co-panelists, and they are Erica Whyman, who is the acting artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. I think we need applause after that, because we do not often have here people who have Shakespeare so soon after their name, and Roxy Cook, she's on my right, and she is the playwright. She's a playwright and director. And she has written why we are actually organizing it all. She has written a play that is called A Woman Walks into a Bank. And this play won an award out of 1,400 other plays. This play was awarded by the International 503 Theatre Award. Am I correct? Just the other way around. Theatre 503 International Award, Playwriting Award. Now, in a moment, I'll ask Erica to say a few words as to why, out of all these incredible number of plays, it was Roxy's play that was selected by the jury. But I would like to say that today's event is in a way a curtain raiser, because today, Roxy's play can be bought downstairs. It's just been published. The play text has been published. And on the 21st of November, the play actually opens in the theatre, and it will be played there for 3 weeks till the 9th of December. So please try to see it, to read it, and to see it. Now, I'm giving the floor to Erica, who came to the Royal Shakespeare Company. It just gives me pleasure to say this name again. In 2013, and then you were deputy acting deputy artistic director. Since 2021, Erica Whyman has been the acting artistic director in Royal Shakespeare Company. So she was one of the members of the jury, and I would like to ask you to say a few words about the selection. Thank you.
Should I stand, Masha? Is that better,
Maybe.
you think? Yes.
Maybe,
Hello.
yeah.
Thank you very much for having us tonight. How wonderful to be here. I'm incredibly proud of Theatre 503. I am the chair of the board at Theatre 503 and have been for a decade. And I keep trying to step down, but it's impossible because I love it too much. And 4 times now, I've also been the chair of the judges of the International Playwriting Award. However, I have to disappoint you, Masha, which is I am no longer the acting artistic director of the Royal Shakespeare Company. That's all right, because I was there for a very long time. And I, in my role at the RSC, I did direct Shakespeare from time to time, but my passion was for new plays, for new work. And obviously the resources of somewhere like the Royal Shakespeare Company are extraordinary, and we were able to produce in the time that I was there many shows of different scales, different shapes and sizes, everywhere from My Neighbour Totoro, which opens next week, I'm still plugging that for them, through to very small work in the other place. And the reason I tell you that is that for me, through this decade in my life, Theatre 503 really has been the place where the flame is kept alive. And if any of you don't know it, I urge you to go and see Roxy's play, not only because Roxy's play is amazing, but because the theatre itself, I think, shares some values with what I understand about this club and this building, the sense that ideas and I guess the things that are on fire in our world and things that are very difficult to consider and contemplate need to be contemplated through artistic endeavour. And Theatre 503 does that with really a couple of beans and a lot of love. It's a very small theatre in Battersea, although we are moving towards a brilliant new studio space around the corner that will help us to develop writers. So that is the context in which this international award happens. The plays, almost 1,500 plays, are read by a team of brilliant volunteer dramaturgs, many of them professional dramaturgs and playwrights themselves or directors themselves. And they read all of the plays at least twice, most of them 3 times. And they are all read completely anonymously. There are many awards that profess to do that and don't really do it. These are read absolutely anonymously. The key criterion for this award is that it is a debut play. So it's the first play. And of course, sometimes, and Roxy might tell us more about this, there have been plays that have been written and no one has seen them. No one has seen what they are. But essentially, this is the first time that the writer has said, yes, I've written a play and I want you to read it. And it's an incredible privilege, therefore, to read them. The judges get the easy end. We get a very small selection for the shortlist to argue about for hours. Because the plays are always, and they were this year, sensationally interesting. And we're always amazed, we shouldn't be, we're always amazed that this talent that has been hiding its light or hasn't yet had the opportunity or the courage to show itself is so diverse, so exciting, so formally experimental. Every time I chair the award, I say to the panel of judges, very distinguished judges, playwrights. This year, for example, Winston Pinnock was on the panel, Alice Birch was on the panel, amazing group of artists. I say, I will try not to have a deciding vote, and therefore I will try not to have an opinion. It's really, I'm just going to guide the conversation. And every year, what happens is I am disgracefully passionate about at least one play, and in this case, it was this play. And I found myself hotly defending Roxy's play. Let me explain that we hotly had to defend every single play because we loved them all. But I fell for this play instantly, and I think it is a cocktail of things about it. It has, which I'm sure we're going to hear in a moment, it has a facility with language and how language both works and doesn't work, how language fragments and collapses on us, which appealed to me enormously. it says something. I remember saying to you at the award ceremony, it's about everything. I think it's about everything. I think it's about how economic, political systems fail us all in every culture. And I found that to be both heartening and familiar and daring. But it also speaks of Russian culture, or it spoke to me of Russian culture in a way that I hadn't encountered it before. And for that to happen in this particular year, felt both that the courage of the play, the detail of the play, and the intimacy of the relationship that Roxy has with her characters was something that very much needed to be staged. And we'll talk some more perhaps about what that feels like, but that's why it won. It's a wonderful, wonderful play.
Thank you so much, Erica. And it gave us some idea, but Roxy will tell us obviously more about her play, but what I just wanted to say that staging Russia in itself is much more complicated task than doing anything else about Russia, writing about Russia, just talking about Russia. This is done a lot and in different contexts. But to bring Russia alive on stage is a different thing, and you'll say a few words about it, and then after that we are having a reading, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion about what you've heard or questions you would like to ask, and then we'll invite you to have a glass of wine and share sort of your thoughts and opinions and whatnot about the whole evening. So it is quite a multi-layered evening, I would say, and so we give Roxy a word, please.
Can I sit down or should I stand up?
I think standing up is better generally, but if you are more comfortable, then you can sit.
Is this thing on? Hello? Yeah. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm not great at public speaking, so I won't be as articulate as Erica and Masha, but yes, I'm the writer-director of A Woman Walks Into a Bank, which starts when an old woman living in Moscow in 2018 with dementia walks into a bank confused and is sold a sort of very high interest, quick turnover loan, which she forgets all about. And from that point onwards, things sort of spiral out of control. And it sort of came about when I had wanted, in about 2018, I knew I wanted to write a play about Russia because I felt that I wanted to sort of talk about the in-between, and what I mean by that, I suppose, is not the incredibly brave people sort of risking their lives protesting necessarily, or the people, sort of the pro-Putin nutcases, but sort of just the mass. It felt like it was just something that I wasn't seeing sort of reflected in art or in the media, and I didn't quite understand it myself, but I just felt like there was this feeling of I don't know, inability to change things, or a sort of acceptance of the way things had been and had always been. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and I still don't know if I entirely understand it. But then I sort of had an idea of a route in, which was this, I suppose, dramatization of something that sort of happened to my grandmother in Moscow. And I thought maybe if I could start with this woman who does this thing that's actually quite commonplace, quite ordinary in and of itself, and then sort of imagine, you know, who's this young guy who conned her, and who's the debt collector who harassed her. You know, maybe I can sort of try and understand it in my own way. And so, yeah, that's sort of where the idea for it came from and how I sort of began that journey. Is there anything else that would be useful to know about the play or?
The reading.
Yeah.
Right. Shall I say maybe a few words, or maybe you would like to say
about what we're going to see?
Just general approach to Russia
Yeah.
on stage in London. We'll speak about theatre in Russia later on,
Yeah.
but maybe just a couple of words about Russia, how it is presented in London, on London stage. Let's put it like
Well, it's interesting because it's been represented more and more, I guess, recently in the last couple of years with, you know, brilliant play by Lucy Prebble, A Very Expensive Poison, and then Peter Morgan's Patriots more recently, which are both fantastic plays that, yeah, bring real life sort of under the spotlight, I suppose, interrogate them. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was, I mean, I can't speak bigger picture, I suppose, too much on that, but yeah, for me, it was sort of just like, what can I bring to this conversation? And actually, as someone who's not fully Russian and who's never lived in Russia, you know, I've got one foot in and one foot out. Actually, what can that give me as well in terms of giving people a flavour of some of the things I want to talk about, but also having some distance from it as well. So yeah, I'm sure there are people actually who know more about the presentations of Russia, but that was sort of my take on it, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Roxy. In a minute, you'll probably introduce the extras you were going to read. But what I would like to say is that what was my answer to the question Roxy has just asked? What did she bring to this theme of presenting Russia on stage, apart from big characters that obviously populate both Patriots and A Very Expensive Poison? When I thought about these two plays, it suddenly occurred to me that it was Boris Berezovsky that was in both of them. You know, that somehow, obviously, in The Very Expensive Poison, which is based on Luke Harden's book about Alexander Litvinenko's assassination in London. So it's not about Berezovsky, it is about Litvinenko and how he was assassinated here. Patriots has even Putin among other people, and Abramovich, you know, all the well-known Russian characters. But Roxy's play, apart from dealing with ordinary people, it has one very striking quality. It has compassion for the people living in Russia. Because basically we are constantly hearing about Russia in the news as an awful totalitarian monster, which it is. And all the horrible crimes that it's been committing both inside and outside, about the repressions of political opponents and aggression, imperial attempts outside of the country. But apart from all this, what has been lacking and what is generally lacking is this very simple feeling of feeling for people who have no idea what actually is going on and what's happening in their name. Of course, you would say, why don't they have any idea? Partially because they're ignorant, partially because they have been brainwashed. There are lots of explanations, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later. But the horrible lives the majority of ordinary people live in Russia today, and for the last God knows how many years, is it the extras and the actors, right? So are the actors coming on stage now? I think
Yes, so we'll have Sam Newton, our brilliant Sam Newton and Julia Innocenti, who are going to come and do scenes 1 to 5, which is just the opening of the show. And yeah, give it up for these guys. And we don't need to do stage direction. what was that? Okay. So then I think we'll have to sit then, if you can hold the microphone. Are you going to be okay with that? I could hold. Do you want to hold the mic? Music sound, yes. We can just be music. Is that okay? Yeah.
Oh, no. Couldn't possibly.
Of course you can. You do your thing. You can do it.
Well, no, yeah, should we just do this?
Absolutely.
We definitely need to have a mic, do we? Okay.
It's for the recording.
For the recording.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's just do this.
I think. How does that work?
You need to turn the page.
I think we'll do it.
Okay, sure.
A woman walks into a bank.
An old woman walks into a bank.
An old woman walks into a bank in Moscow, Russia, because she'd seen a new sign on the window of the bank the week before that said,
Make your one day happen today, with a picture of a man who looked friendly, holding out money and smiling.
and although at the time the old woman had thought nothing of the sign, but just waited for the lights beside the bank to turn from red to green,
Crossed the road, gone home.
she noticed the sign the next day and the next day and the next, until eventually it was one of the only things that happened that week that she could remember.
Make your one day happen today. Make today happen one day. One perfect, nondescript day happening finally. Brilliant, amazing. What happens tomorrow? Doesn't matter. Your one day happens. Yep, so.
And so although the old woman wasn't entirely sure what the new sign meant or even referred to, she felt good about the man with the money and the smile, and so carried him around with her for the rest of the week, round the supermarket and the pharmacy and the boulevard, and even thought about him that evening as she prepared tea for herself and for her cat.
Sally. A woman walks into a bank.
An old woman walks into a bank.
An old woman walks into a bank in Moscow, Russia, because she needs money again. And she needs money because old women in Russia always need money.
This is common knowledge.
Free trips to the Black Sea if your father was tortured in the Gulag? Sure. But money? No.
No, she needs money again because earlier that week she telephoned her daughter,
A
who
translator.
lives abroad with her foreign family somewhere foreign.
And she'd said,
I need money. I need money so I can buy food for myself, and food for Sally, and medicine for me, and presents for you.
and her daughter had, like many times before, sat at her desk, opened her laptop, transferred the money, phoned the old woman back, told her she'd transferred it, and then returned to her translating in her family, somewhere far away, somewhere foreign.
And the old woman had gone to the machine, taken out a portion of the money, and gone home.
And she'd done the same thing the next day.
And the next.
And the next.
And the next.
Until on the 5th day she'd taken out all of the money, all 5 portions, put it in a box, and put it away.
Far away at the top of her wardrobe, far away from the bank across the road.
So, an old woman walks into a bank because an old woman doesn't trust banks.
Well, no, she just likes to have something she can... It's just something she's always done. She's used rubles since Stalin was in power, and now you expect her to trust a number on a screen? No, and thank you.
Okay. So, an old woman walks into a bank in Moscow, Russia because she has money in her apartment already?
But she's forgotten where it is.
Right.
And not only that, but she's forgotten about her trips to the machine, the box, the wardrobe, and so she decides, if my daughter can't follow through with her promises, if she can't even do that, then I'll have to find someone else who can.
And just as she thinks this, she looks out of the window at the bank across the road, and yes, the man with the smile holding out some money.
Of course. An old woman walks into a bank and is surprised by just how calm everything is.
How quiet and still, no traffic, no voices.
Different world.
Squares of teal and green spin out in pleasing diagonals.
Television plays quietly. News, improvements, seating in the park.
Men and women nod in appreciation.
And other men and women talk quietly behind screens.
And a man takes out money in a reassuring way.
An old woman feels a calm, a clarity. And as she stands there just for a moment, for the very first moment in a very long time, she finds something.
A lifting
And
mist.
she thinks, that money is at the top of my wardrobe, in that nice box that Lana gave me. She remembers. She turns, she walks out of the bank.
Except, at that precise moment, she's actually still in the bank.
At that precise moment of clarity, of calm,
A young man spots her, jumps up.
touches her on the shoulder and says,
Can I help you, Gran?
and so an old woman forgets all about the box and the wardrobe and says, yes?
A young man walks up to an old woman.
A young man walks up to an old woman who has just walked into a bank.
A young man does this thing you probably grasp by now because he is
And
excited.
he is excited because he has recently become the bank manager.
That's right. He's 25, only 25, but after 3 years of working at the bank, they've realised what he realised so long ago. That like most great men in Russia, he has a work ethic like no other. An authority that is commanding, but doesn't make you feel like you're being put in your place. A sort of je ne sais... Yeah, sorry.
A young man does walk up to an old woman in a bank in Moscow, Russia, but he's one of 3 bank managers.
One of 3 managers who were recently told that they were being
Or
promoted.
that their job titles were being changed internally.
And although the woman telling them this didn't go into the exact details of why or how or who came up with the idea, she did talk about...
A new initiative to build confidence in employees and confidence in clients.
Want to speak to the manager? I'm here. I can help. Young? Sure. But did you see my badge?
He's not really a bank manager. He doesn't manage anything. And the young man does know this. He does.
But he knows it, and then he forgets it.
He forgets it because really, when you break it down to everyone outside the bank,
Mum at home,
mum's friends round for tea,
Dad on the phone.
girls from school who he never spoke to but might one day bump into.
The guy sweeping the pavement outside the bank, watching him walk in every morning with his name badge on.
To all those people, he really is the bank manager.
He did well at school.
But never in the right ways, you know?
He was teased for having a baby
He
face.
was teased for having a dad from somewhere else.
He was teased by the kids at the bottom for not being at the bottom, and the kids at the top for not being at the top.
And so now it's his moment, and he is excited.
He's allowed to be excited. He's the bank manager, so who the fuck cares?
A young man walks up to an old woman in a bank in Moscow, Russia.
Because we're in Russia. Do we mention that it's August 2018 and that we are in Russia? We're in Russia and there's this buzz going around. We just hosted the World Cup
The incident-free World Cup.
and everyone had a great time.
There was free metro travel.
Parties in the
The
square.
police, the ones with guns, they were smiling.
Did we mention it was an incident-free event?
And we got to the quarterfinals.
It all seems a little distant now, but people finally saw that, yeah, it's actually okay over here. And no, it doesn't snow in the summer. It's very warm.
And okay, we're a little overconfident. We get that. But it's just because we really are better.
Despite everything we've been through, we really are better. Think of like a sport or an art form, maybe. You got one? Got one? Got one?
Theatre.
We invented it. Okay, we didn't invent it, but we took what it had been before and we made it our own. Shakespeare, great, you can keep him. But the minutiae of everyday behaviour, compelling psychological reality. Is it comedy? Is it tragedy?
It's the Russian soul. That's what it is.
See, we just have this thing. You don't want to admit that it's true, but it absolutely is true. And the funny thing is, everybody knows it.
This young man is excited, and we're excited. We're excited for him. Who cares if he's not really a bank manager?
His name badge says bank manager. He feels like a bank manager. So let him enjoy this moment.
It's 2018.
We're in Russia!
A young man walks up to an old woman in Moscow, Russia, because of all these things.
But mainly because the rules have changed. Again.
And that along with calling 25-year-old losers bank managers, the bank has also introduced an initiative to get pensioners to sign up to loans.
Pensioners who don't have someone there to say...
Maybe not.
And these loans are quick. They are easy. Make your one day happen today.
But they also have really big interest rates. Interest rates you only find out about when your bank sells your loan to a debt collector.
And the debt collector starts charging you 2% interest a day. Not sure how that's legal, but it is legal.
A young man walks up to an old woman in a bank in Moscow, Russia, because there's this initiative, these loans, but...
He hasn't sold one yet. He's just not found the right time to, he's trying to gauge that before, yeah.
The bank understands.
The bank seems to understand.
No one's told him something bad will happen if he doesn't sell a loan.
But also...
No one's told him something bad won't happen if he doesn't sell a loan.
And so a young man walks up to an old woman because she seems to be standing, waiting for him.
And then she turns, like she's suddenly realised she's in the wrong building and leaves, gone. And actually, surprisingly, he feels relieved.
But no, he doesn't. He doesn't feel relieved. Oh, I'm so relieved, said no Russian ever. She turns, but she hasn't left yet. And so he jumps up, touches her on the shoulder and says, Can I help you, Gran? And
Her grey eyes cloud over, and in that momentary shade he sees his dear Granny Irina, who he loves very, very much. And
no, he doesn't. Well, his granny isn't called Irina, she's called Dorina, and she doesn't have grey eyes, she has dark eyes like him. No. He jumps up, touches her on the shoulder and says, "Can I help you, Gran?"
And her eyes
do cloud over, but he doesn't look away this time. He just smiles, and then she smiles too, and says,
Yes?
"A cat sits in a balcony room on the 5th floor of an apartment block in Moscow, Russia.
The cat is called Sally. Sally is 18 years old, which is old.
Sally is brown.
Tabby.
Sally has green eyes.
Sally is prone to scratching people she doesn't know. Sally is prone to scratching people she does know. Sally is temperamental.
Sure.
But today Sally is worried as a cat called Sally can really be.
Sally is worried because the old woman she shares her apartment with left suddenly and hasn't come back. Sally's not a needy cat, no. Sally is fine being alone. In fact, Sally would rather be alone, thank you very much. But
there's a routine, what you've come to expect, certain rituals and rules and ways of doing things, and this is
a deviation.
And there's something else that's worrying.
Yes.
The old woman has started feeding her 3 times a day instead of 2.
Sally doesn't mind, I mean, you know.
But the thing is...
Sally's noticed that she's getting a little bit fat.
Because if you give Sally food, Sally will eat it.
Like, she's a cat.
And so this deviation...
is
worrying.
A young man walks an old woman over to a blue plastic chair and he is excited.
His name badge, fantastic, yes.
But what does it even mean?
It's not real. Wait, you know it's not real, right?
But there's being a bank manager, and then there's, like, being a bank manager.
Waiting for the right moment.
Seizing that opportunity.
Nodding to your colleagues as you bring the new client over to the...
New client area.
Using the branded pens because you've got something to write this time, thinking...
Fuck, this suit fits well.
There's being a bank manager, and then they're saying...
All right, Gran, now let's get you sorted.
An old woman sits down in a blue plastic chair and she's excited. Banks aren't scary.
They've never been scary.
And it's unfortunate she found this out so late.
Family member tell you otherwise.
Avoided them for so long.
People love a good story.
But she's here now, with this nice young man with a smile.
And some money.
She's making it happen. Today, finally.
A young man sits in a blue plastic chair and he is excited. He is excited, but he is also worried. He is worried because the old woman keeps asking him the same questions over and over again, like...
How long have you worked here?
And...
What's your name then?
And then again...
What's your name?
And the bank did mention this might happen, and they did even role-play a scenario where this might happen, and he wants to sell a loan, he really does, but not to anyone, okay? There are some lines you have to draw, and like most great men in Russia, he knows that those lines are important.
An old woman sits in a blue plastic chair because... An old woman sits in a blue plastic chair in a bank in Moscow, Russia because... I don't... She doesn't remember what the form is for. She doesn't even remember filling out the first half of the form.
But it is her handwriting. And the handwriting is still wet. And there is a young man sitting opposite her, smiling.
He has a kind face, a baby face, a face you don't see so much anymore.
And there's a television playing. Good news. Improvements in the square.
And men and women nod in appreciation, and other men and women murmur behind screens.
And so?
An old woman, not wanting to trouble him, not wanting to trouble anyone, continues filling out the form. No cause for alarm.
A young man sits in a blue plastic chair in a bank in Moscow, Russia, and he looks at an old woman. And he looks at his colleague standing, watching behind the glass, and he feels... better. Sure. She asked him the same thing once or twice, but look, she remembers all the important stuff. She knows what she's doing. And if she doesn't know what she's doing, then whose fault's that?
And then she's done. She signs it, gives it back.
And he takes it to his colleague behind the glass.
And it's just so simple.
So incredibly simple. We're really surprised that there isn't more to it.
But just as he's leaving, just as he turns around and walks away...
She touches him on the shoulder and says...
Thank you. You were very helpful.
Fuck.
And he...
He goes to the canteen across the road and orders 3 things. Why not? Today's been a good day. Today's been an exceptionally good day. Today's been an exceptionally good day, particularly when you compare it to all the underwhelming days he's had. Make your one day happen. Too right.
A cat called Sally continues to sit alone in a balcony room in Moscow, Russia.
She's played with her ball.
She's done some scratching.
She's played with her mouse, even though Sally does know
She does.
that it's not a real mouse. Sally's not stupid.
But winning feels good.
And so now, Sally might as well nap.
She's not going to throw out all her plans. She's not going to throw all her plans out of the window because the old woman she shares her apartment with hasn't come back, is she?
She's not.
And so she goes to look for somewhere to nap. Somewhere rectangular.
Yes, somewhere rectangular.
What about?
Oh no. That's always looked comfy.
Absolutely not. Do you remember the last time she cleaned it? There.
Where?
There.
Perfect.
Lightly.
She is.
Lightly.
Oh, Jesus, what was that?
A pine cone, a decorative pine cone. She stepped on it yesterday.
Do you blame her? How is Sally supposed to navigate this mess?
Okay, but look.
Yes? Yes. A box at the top of the old woman's wardrobe, whose door she has
For all her flaws.
rather kindly left ajar.
And this box is perfect.
Because as well as being rectangular, it has lots of little bundles of coloured paper in it, each one beautifully decorated with one of Sally's favourite historical landmarks.
Sally can definitely work with this.
And so she gets in, curls up, and falls asleep. Keep going.
Good. Should we finish?
One more?
You could do one more, but I'll have to be the debt collector then.
No.
Now, somewhere else in Moscow, Russia.
Somewhere completely, totally, 100% else in Moscow, Russia.
A debt collector sits in a warehouse in a suburb of a suburb of a
Wait,
house.
a Russian debt collector sits in a warehouse in a suburb of a suburb of a suburb. There's a difference, remember? And so this Russian debt collector, Ivan?
He says his name is Ivan, but so do most of them. That guy 2 desks away, Ivan.
That blonde one with the funny mustache, also Ivan.
The man making calls in the corner while he smokes his cigarette and lights another with his bare hand.
You guessed it, Ivan.
They all use fake names here.
They're not literally all called Ivan.
But for all of you right now, their real names don't matter.
It's what they do that matters.
A young woman opens the door of her apartment one morning to find the word thief spray painted on the nameplate.
Just in case the neighbours were wondering.
An old man reads his grandson a bedtime story.
As a Molotov cocktail comes flying through the window.
And this guy in the east
Oh, you must have heard this one.
opens the paper one morning to find an obituary for his 1-year-old daughter.
She's alive and well.
But now all he can think about is whether she'll always be alive and well.
There's a checklist, a cheat sheet, if you will.
And this Russian debt collector knows it.
He knows that you start by calling repeatedly.
Not repeatedly, incessantly, hundreds of times a day.
And if that doesn't work, call the
No
parents.
parents, no problem. Children are a more
Rewarding?
target.
Scratch the car.
Glue the locks.
Steal the pets.
And if none of that works, literally not a single one of those things work.
Accuse them of being a paedophile.
It is a classic in Russia.
Okay. Some guy somewhere in Russia. I'm not sure where now. It is quite big, goes rogue, but does it have anything to do with him, huh?
Well,
I suppose it depends on who he is.
and what he's doing here? Sorry, did I miss something? Who exactly is he?
A debt collector, you just said.
Okay, yeah, but we're getting into it. We're providing some context for the world he
Me?
is from.
Moscow, Russia. And so this debt collector, who is called Ivan, by the way, goes outside to eat the lunch that his wife Olga made him that morning.
I'm sorry. Let's just... Ivan?
Yes?
He's not called Ivan.
Why is his lunch relevant? And who is Olga?
His wife.
No, I get it. But, what, a debt collector eats his lunch?
Vinaigrette. Classic Russian salad. I mean, we have a lot of classics, but this is a real classic, huh? Worker's lunch, old-time favourite, and Olga makes the best vinaigrette. Potatoes, carrots, pickled cabbage, peas and onions. Nothing from the ground will hurt you, huh? Beetroot, because we are in Russia. You don't need a reason, huh? And lashings of pickled cucumber for the soul.
Can we just go back a bit? A debt collector sits in a warehouse, and his phone...
No, not yet. He has 10 minutes before. Just let him have 10.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you want me to... a debt collector sits in a warehouse... Oh, wait, sorry. A debt collector goes outside to a courtyard surrounded by flats.
Flats that rise high, protecting it.
Protecting a playground with benches and a fountain and a kiosk.
Yes.
Kiosk that sells surprisingly good pastries.
Not surprisingly. Everyone knows the best pastries come from kiosks in courtyards. Look at it, huh? Still and warm. And the only sound, the only movement, little blackbirds.
Starlings, maybe?
Jumping in and out of the fountain, shaking themselves dry.
It is so still.
And it is so peaceful.
You can just...
And yes, he thinks, there are birds washing themselves in fountains in courtyards all over Moscow.
But who cares? These are my birds. This is my courtyard. This is my modern Russian scene.
And so this
Man free to be just a man.
joins the birds and rinses the lunchbox Olga gave him,
And then he goes to the kiosk where a young woman sits every day.
He likes her.
buys a magazine for Olga and cigarettes for himself.
Sits on a bench and smokes.
And just as he thinks this couldn't get any more
Do you know when you have moments like that?
music,
Russian music. It's the best kind of music. It's a song he loved since he was small.
And he doesn't worry about why it's playing in a courtyard at lunchtime.
He just listens as it grows.
Gently at first.
then bigger,
Grander.
Louder.
until his phone,
No.
his phone,
No.
His phone.
No. Fuck you bastards.
His phone buzzing angrily in his pocket.
What's this about a modern Russian scene? Wake the fuck up!
What?
What do you mean, what? This is the third time I've called you.
Is your phone broken or should I be concerned?
No. Lunch.
I don't care which meal you're eating. If I call you, you pick up the phone.
Whatever, just get a pen.
You moocher.
And it's broken. Just like that.
The young woman in the kiosk frowns.
She never frowned before.
The birds fly to a courtyard somewhere else.
And this man, who is no longer just a man free to eat his lunch,
Oh, how idyllic.
but a debt collector, remember?
Fine.
He
Leaves a courtyard that is quiet and peaceful because the only people who rent spaces there.
have to be
Have
quiet.
to be peaceful.
And hurries back to the warehouse, phone still cursing in his
I don't
hand.
understand why this is taking so long.
Takes the pen his wife Olga.
Who probably doesn't make the best vinaigrette. She just makes it, doesn't master it.
Bought him for their anniversary last year and writes down the information about.
An old woman who walked into a bank this morning because she needed money.
Or at least that's what they told her.
Who has until the end of September to pay it back.
Sounds realistic.
Who lives in Kutuzovsky.
Good for her.
Who has no named dependents.
That's not inconceivable.
And who was born in 1936.
That's the same year as his mother. And so a debt collector ends the call, makes a note of when the money is due, and he wonders if the old woman has done the same.
Sorry, I ruined that surprise. I didn't know. I wasn't in on it. Here we go. Hello?
Thank you very much. Thanks to the actors. Can we have their names again? Because
Yes. So
yeah.
we had Sam Newton playing B/the young man. We had Julia Innocenti playing A/the old woman, and we had Keith, who made his dramatic appearance at the end, playing the C or the debt collector. So they're all sort of storytellers first, and then they become the characters. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It was very, very impressive. The question I have to ask is, who plays Sally?
The
cat.
Me.
The cat who lives in Moscow.
Yeah, so they all play Sally, so you get a little sense there of, we start with three storytellers, sort of in quite a, I wouldn't say neutral, but sort of a blank page, trying to figure out how to tell the story. And as the show progresses, they sort of, I suppose, align themselves more with one character. So we've got four main characters. We've got the old woman, the young man, or the bank manager, and then the debt collector, and then obviously Sally. So for Sally, all three of them play Sally, or sometimes one, or sometimes two. It sort of depends on the scene. But Sally is sort of the character they can all agree on, the character that they all, I suppose, enjoy playing and sort of are one with. And it gets a bit trickier when they take a side for the other characters, you know, the debt collector, the old woman, and have to sort of try to explain that story. That's a little bit more complicated.
Right. I don't want you to disclose all the secrets of the play, but why is Sally necessary? Why did you think of Sally from the start, or did it appear just out of nowhere, just jumped out from the roof, or what happened?
Is she necessary? Good question. She's definitely a lot of fun, but I think the thing with Sally is that she's the only character who can see what's happening because she's the only person who lives with the old woman, but because she's a cat, she can't really do anything about it. And when I tried to start to figure out how to sort of frame the piece, I started by workshopping Russian fairy tales, and obviously there are lots of like talking animals, talking cats, talking dogs, and my grandmother did have a cat called Sally, and so I just thought maybe this is a sort of a fun sort of viewpoint on this world, and she actually ends up being very important in terms of the plot without meaning to be.
Right. Well, so we'll be looking forward to seeing how all this is developing on stage. I'm sure you all have already noticed how much humor, absurdity, pace, action and suspense is in this play, and I can tell you that it's not disappearing till the very end and gets even more and more and more so. So don't leave in the middle if you go to the theatre and probably are not yet sure whether you like it or not, because the ending will be very, very unexpected. But I don't know, do you want to say why you chose this particular form, or this is a question that is impossible to answer?
I suppose I can say a little bit about that. So it did start with the fairy tales. I'm thinking, okay, I'm not sure how to tell this story, so let's think about what like particularly Russian forms there are that are available, and did a workshop on the fairy tales and sort of the repetitive nature of them, the sort of, you know, things come in threes, you have the talking animals. There was just something about that felt right. And then sort of thinking, okay, so to be honest, we were talking about this earlier, like I didn't really know how to start it, and so by me repeating lines in order to figure out how to write it, it became actually that the storytellers were trying to figure out, okay, why am I here? And like, what do I believe in? And how can I defend this thing that I'm doing that might not be on the outside a good thing and probably isn't, but how can I sort of justify that to an audience and sort of have that relationship with them? So yeah, it was sort of quite organic, but that was the thinking of it.
Right. Would you like
Masha,
to
may
say,
I just add something?
Yeah.
So I didn't want to say too much about the form before you heard a little bit of it, but I have two senses in which I really respond to this repetition, and because each one, a bit like minimalist music, is very specific and just changes a little bit. And one is a kind of historical perspective. I was saying to Roxy, I feel so old that history is absolutely repeating itself, and I'm sure this is an experience lots of us have. And that sense in the play, therefore, of just when you think you've found a narrative that you can hang on to, it begins again, and the same mistakes are made. Particularly, I think you treat the sense of hopefulness, the possibility that it might be all right, and then it isn't. So that feels very much of this moment in our lives. But I think also what you've already said, Roxy, about how each character, and in a sense then they're identified with the actor, the storyteller, is trying to tell a story that is filled with discomfort, and to try to avoid judgment, and yet it's impossible to avoid judgment, one's own feelings about a person or how it resonates with an experience that we've had or a political understanding that we have. That those two senses that the form really allows us to dive into, whilst agreeing strongly that, as you heard, it's very funny, it's very compassionate about all the human beings, the storytellers and the characters, but it's difficult in this moment, perhaps it always is, to tell our story with certainty And so I feel like Roxy's looking at that, the crumbling of certainty.
I think partially it happens because she feels herself, and she, in a way, she wants her audience to feel that it's not easy to understand Russia. Yes. There is this distance, there is this remoteness, there is this riddle wrapped into mystery, or whatever the saying goes. And that's why there is, I think that's a very, very acute observation. Yes, there is this uncertainty because we are looking from a distance, and it's difficult to always understand why is this, why this absurdity, why these disasters, why is this tragedy, which it could have been different, but unfortunately in Russia it can't. It just goes this horrible, vicious circle of tragedy and disaster. We'll open probably soon for questions, but there was one more aspect that we all wanted to discuss. And this aspect was, yes, Roxy and her audiences will be looking at Russia from a side, from a distance. Is it possible today to look at Russia from inside in the theatre? Unfortunately not. Probably you all know the tragic story of Evgenia Berkovich and Svetlana Petrichuk, two women who made a wonderful show, also incidentally with the title or related to Russian folk tales, sort of like archetypal plot. And this is a story about women falling in love with Islamist terrorists who seem romantic and interesting, and taking them out of their dreary lives. When the play was staged in Russia, it received the most prestigious theatre award, Zolotaya Maska, the Golden Mask. And it was quite popular. It was staged in several in cities and towns. But what happened then? Evgenia Berkovich wrote very open, very disturbing, I would say, poetry about the war, very much anti-war poetry. And both she and she was the director of the play that won the Golden Mask, and the playwright Svetlana Petrichuk, they were arrested, and they have been in prison on remand, that is before the trial, for over 6 months now. Their play was trying to analyze what drives these women, what makes them forget everything about anything, but just go after these men who seem attractive. What the prosecution says and what probably might bring these women into prison, into colonies, penal colonies for, I don't know, for decades, for many years, like 18 or 20 years, was that they were accused of supporting Islamic terrorism. And so they were the terrorism. It's an awful crime everywhere. So if you look at it, you realize how absurd it is. And that is why I think it's so important that Roxy's play on a much smaller scale, it does catch this element of the absurdity that is very present in Russian life, but also because it shows that it's absolutely impossible to put anything honest and artistic on the Russian stage. This is just one story. There are plenty of others. There is a well-known theater director, Dmitry Krymov, who brought his productions here a couple of times. He also is a very unorthodox director. He happened to be in America on the day when the war started on the 24th of February 2022. And he immediately decided not to go back. So his plays were still running for some time. Then one by one, they disappeared from the theaters, and some of them were still playing, and are maybe playing still, but his name is not there. So basically, just these two examples give you an idea of what is happening in Russian theater, which is not surprising because this is what's happening, and much worse things are happening in Russian lives. So basically the question I wanted maybe to ask you both, maybe to start with Erica, do you think that the British theater or the British public or anybody in Britain can do something to support Russian theater, Russian art, Russian society, Russian, well, God knows what. Yeah.
It's such a good and difficult question. I think we have to. I think it's much easier said than done. I suppose just to walk back over recent years, you spoke earlier about Lucy Preble's play, Peter Morgan's play, and both of them are striking because they're very different plays. I think Lucy's perhaps has a little more compassion in a very particular way in the telling of that story. But essentially, they both respond to a kind of a news journalism, I want to say caricature, and that's unfair, but a reductive view of Russia. And for reasons which, of course, I understand, and interestingly, both written began their, as I understand it, began their writing process before the war or the full-scale invasion. They seem to me, they're very important plays, I think, and they're very elegant and they're very clever plays. But they do, particularly Peter's, the Patriots, really reinforce a notion of these towering and frightening figures in leading roles in Russia, and they do not seem to bear any relationship to what we in this country and all over the world, of course, know as the sort of sophistication and complexity of Russian theatre or Russian literature. The culture that is represented by that story is perhaps inevitably very narrow. In preparing for tonight, I was very much reminded of an ex-colleague of mine at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Just as I was arriving, the brilliant director and artistic director Michael Boyd was stepping down, and Michael very sadly passed away this year. Michael was a huge. He was a fan of Russian theatre, but he was also steeped in Russian theatre. He spent a lot of time in Moscow in particular, and he cared very much about the need for cultural exchange. He just before I arrived in Stratford, he curated a brilliant programme of Russian theatre, The Grain Store, which a very important play, you'll forgive me that at the time was included in that programme, by a Ukrainian writer, of course. And the Drunks. He was both of those plays came out of a 4-year programme that Michael led on, the RSC led on, in encouraging very young writers in Russia to write for the British stage. That kind of endeavour seems to me absolutely absent at the moment. Again, perhaps understandably, but I think we need it more, not less. And there's a beautiful interview, if you want to look up Michael's writing on this. He gave an interview to What's on Stage when that programme was announced. And he speaks about how the strong sense in Russia at the time, so I'm going back to 2013, was of Britain disrespecting Russian culture. And I was so struck when I saw that at the responsibility Michael felt to try and ensure that was not the message, that one may have an essential or necessary skepticism about what arrives here from Russia, but one must try and make cultural links. And if you'll forgive me, just one more thought. I was privileged to be in a conversation in the middle of last year. I have, through the RSC work, I have a strong relationship with the City of Culture in Coventry, it happened during the pandemic. And a great city of peace, of course, a great city of reconciliation, knows something about how very difficult that is. And I was invited to a dinner with the German ambassador. And our host, the Bishop of Coventry, said to the German ambassador, can you help us think through how we might prepare for the end of the conflict in Ukraine? And the German ambassador, to his great credit, I think, said, oh, well, it's a very good question, because artists are essential to thinking about the end. Whilst we may none of us be able fully to imagine it, we have to. We must imagine what peace will be like. There will be peace. We don't know what form it will take. And we have responsibilities now to try and write it. That doesn't, of course, necessarily mean telling the story of what life will be like in Ukraine, although it might take that form. But to imagine what you said, compassion for one another across this impossibly devastating situation. And I mention it because I think it's as important as that. That I think that's right. We need to make new ways to understand Russian culture. And I've always believed that the theatre has a special role in that because we share a room. We share a room. We're in a room together. It is not possible to be at a distance. So Roxy's distance is incredibly helpful in the writing of this play. But the experience of the audience, of course, is not at a distance. We are complicit, implicit in how the story functions. So I think we urgently need to try and tell some new stories. And I'd be very keen to hear, Masha, what we can do for our compatriots in the theatre who cannot currently make work. Because Krimov, of course, can make work, but those artists, I'm struck personally by the artistic directors who stepped down in protest so courageously and exiled themselves, both from the country but also from the practice of theatre. What can we do?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Erica. It was very, very poignant and to the point. And I didn't know about Michael Boyd's death, but I interviewed him when I worked for the BBC. And why did I interview him? Because he went to study and to be present in the theatre of Anatoly Efros, one of the greatest directors, Russian directors of the 20th century, whose son Dmitry Krimov is, so it's sort of Russia has this tradition, obviously, not here it is basically it runs in the family, but generally when people often say I put it, derogatory words about the Russian culture, thinking that it's all imperial and aggressive and all that. The official culture might be, but there's always been the best thing about the Russian culture. It's that it's been for centuries trying to protest against the tyranny of the state. And this human and liberal tradition has been very, very, very much alive. What can be done? I don't know. I mean, today, and how can one help, say, Zhenya Berkovich and Svetlana Petrichuk? I can't imagine this, of course, apart from telling their horrible and absurd story everywhere. I just think that knowing about it is already something, and it helps to understand Russian life and Russian art. Would you like to say something about this, about what can be done in view of the tragedy of Russian theatre and Russian culture and Russia in general today?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I'm sort of trying to think what I can add to what you both have said so well. I don't know what the answer to that would be. I think you're right in that having the conversation about what's happening is sort of the first step. And for me, not shutting down the conversation. Like, I just think, we were talking more generally this morning, but, with all the things that are difficult to talk about, whether that's something that's happening or about whether we think something should be put on, I think just creating space for that is really important. I don't know. I don't. I'm not,
thanks. That was quite relevant. I will at this point open it up for questions, because several things apart from the play, lots of things were brought up, and maybe you would like to use the opportunity of having Erica and Roxy with us to ask some questions about the future play, or what's going on in Russia, in Russian theatre, not altogether comprehensively, but just you're very welcome to ask questions.
I have two questions to ladies. The first one was about engagement with Russian theatre, and to you as a representative of Royal Shakespeare Company. Royal Shakespeare Company, that was many years ago, did something which was called RSC in New York. So it was amazing, and that means you do this sort of things abroad. And Chick by Jowl did 3 times Russian plays. They were all wonderful, and they were all speaking in a different manner about Russia. And is there something you could think of in terms of doing in Russia? That's sort of the question to you. And before I ask, maybe, because the other question was about your play, which is lovely. It's wonderful. It doesn't feel like a modern British English play. It feels more poetic. It is very poetic. And I was thinking more like a Scottish play. Then I thought, because they are poetic, Scottish plays are poetic. But then you mentioned cat there, and I thought, before you mentioned cat, I thought actually Master and Margarita, description of Moscow. That was, and then that cat, and I thought, yes, wonderful. But but the question to it, I just want to say I really, really liked it. Not this sort of 2 words beat, 2 words beat. That's what we see on the stage these days. But the question was, the plays by Lucy Prebble and by Peter Morgan are plays very political, and you could say the British playwright has got an ownership of the context, of the political context, because things happen also on the British soil. But these days, where you are meant to write only what you experienced, probably only autobiography, but then that's a question to you as well. In that prescriptive world, we have to be honest. How did you feel that the British playwright wrote a play about something very intimate? Actually, there is a certain intimacy in that play, which I loved, about the everyday Russia, and that makes it so different to those plays we mentioned before. So, yeah, there we go.
I mean, to your first question, I think I must no longer speak for the RSC, but I can tell you that some of the mechanisms for working in exchange in Russia with Russia that Cheek by Jowl used, that Michael used at the RSC, are not available to us right now. So, practically, the resources to do it, the relationship of the British Council, for example, to making this kind of exchange work it's much more difficult than it was. And then there are programming reasons why I think that's hard. So I'm sitting here advocating that we make sure Russian artists are on our stages and in our conversations, but there is also an urgent need to make sure that artists who identify as Ukrainian and identify as not Russian are also represented on our stages and in our literature. And of course, we sit here knowing that is also true of Jewish artists, Palestinian artists. So there are programming challenges, I think, to investing in the kind of ambitious programs that you remember with Cheap by Gel or the RSC.
But isn't just. Could it be that there is also, on part, lack of interest? Royal Court did a lot of. Obviously, you know better than I do. They did South American play. They did great, not Syrian, Middle East. That's right, they were called Middle East play. They worked with a Polish playwright, but they never did anything Russian. And so
some of it is fear, I think. I think a complex set of fears. Some of which, hidden in my answer about programming, but some of it is about not knowing where to begin to place oneself in that context. So you're absolutely right. Even in the golden years of investment, there were artists like Declan, Donlan, and Michael who had a facility and understanding of how to make those relationships that wasn't there. But all of it has got harder. Yeah. I just want to echo. I agree with you very much about the poetics of this play, and Roxy should speak about the questions of identity and.
Yeah, I think I feel that I'm probably not the person who can write that big Russian political play. Like, I don't feel like that's what I can offer. And so, although I knew I wanted to talk about something quite big, I feel that the only way that I can and sort of I felt I should approach it was through sort of like the everyday, and those things that I've experienced when I go to visit family there, which in some ways are sort of. Not the stereotypes, that's the wrong word, but some of them are sort of the more symbolic things. Does that make sense? Sort of the more, I don't know, not that they lack nuance, but I think there's a sort of playing with that as well, sort of the foreigner in Russia as well. Does that make sense? The sort of the idea of when I leave, these are sort of the sounds and the smells that I take away with me. Does that make sense? A little bit? Yeah. So yeah, I felt like that's the only sort of approach that I could take was, okay, what's the sort of the seed of some of my own experiences, and then how can I build that out with like research, talking to people who know more than I do, talking to family members, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think everyone has. Yeah, that's the only way I can approach it. Yeah.
The tea is important. I don't want to give anything away, but tea is important, right? The taste as well.
Tea is always important. Yeah.
But I just wanted to respond. I think there's something in particular in A Very Expensive Poison where there is an ability to laugh at and also critique the British role. I mean, you're right that there is an ownership too, but there's a possibility of critique. And maybe that's what's so refreshing is it's just not about Britain.
Yeah, I feel that I felt that there had been. Yeah, that I sort of had seen, I loved and had seen those plays, and so it was just trying to find like what can I bring to it, and what's the sort of the slightly new angle, and having doubts as well about whether that's the right one. Like I'm still not sure, especially in like the beginning of last year, where I felt like putting this on at that time, I felt a bit conflicted about that. I think less so now. Now I feel like actually we should have that conversation, but yeah, I felt like. Those conversations were being had and continue to need to be had, but that was just something that I just couldn't. That's not sort of. I don't think that's my role to play. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Please. And then you. Okay.
I'm intrigued by what you say about fear in relation to programming, because that's something they have in Russia. It's a different kind of fear here, but it's palpable. I hear it from other people in the theatre world, and I also notice that when I go to the theatre in London, I see good acting, good stage production, good lighting, I often don't see the world outside my window. And I sometimes worry that the creatives are, not all of them, present company excluded perhaps, but there are a lot of scared little bunnies in the theater. And well, is there a way that the creatives could show a bit more teeth?
We have to pay them. I mean, it's me being glib, but it's really such a ridiculously broken economic structure, architecture around our artists. And so it's interesting in this conversation because I'm no doubt rosy-tinted, but I identify, when I think about Russian theatre, with not just an investment in the artist and a permanency to that investment, that you can belong to a theatre, that you can be guaranteed at a certain point in your career that you will work as an artist for the rest of your career, which is unheard of for any British artist in the performing arts. But also that art matters, as opposed to commercial success. So our measure of whether an artist may be permitted to continue to work is whether they can generate income, commercial income. And of course that's only got worse in my lifetime. I mean, it's been a little bit cyclical. There was a little moment in a sort of 1999 for about 25 minutes where we funded our theatres a little, not enough, but we could produce some theatre without fear of overreaching ourselves and the structures, the infrastructure just not holding up. So it's huge. Fear is, it seems so trivial by comparison with what we really are frightened of in the world. But the fear I talk about is both those things at once. That if you are putting something in the world that is not welcome and going to cause a storm, then it better be a media-friendly storm, or you can't make a show out of it. because we're so dependent on audiences. And of course, over decades, we've told audiences not to come to things that might stretch them or might be bleak or might be troubling or strange or mysterious. We've told them to come only to things that will warm their hearts, that will be an easy watch, that will be short, that, anyway, you don't get me on as you can see, a soapbox, but I think it is economic, some of that. And I'm privileged to see a lot of very exciting work. 503 is a good example. It's not the only example of work that does show the world outside the window, but it doesn't make the right pages of the newspapers who are complicit in a notion of what success is in this country.
Thank you so much to all of you. This was absolutely brilliant. And I just say, jumping on that final comment, I think we have to pay our artists, but also provide a way in which they can feel. I sometimes wonder if the old academic system of tenure, where they can say things without worry that it might be misconstrued in the news, and all of a sudden, not only will viewers but their own colleagues perhaps jump on them, and what will happen next if they're a freelancer, for example. Roxy, I thought that was brilliant. I was very interested in the tempo of the play, which I suppose relates to the poetics and the musicality of it. It seemed to me quite irregular in a very interesting way, so you'd think it was going in one way and then it was quite quick and then slow and jumping back and forth. And that made me wonder if you had heard parts of it in Russian or thought parts of it in Russian, and if that would be an exercise that you'd be interested in exploring.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've never. Do you know what's so bad? I've never really engaged with that thought properly. But and I've never. I suppose I always thought that it was, for me, the starting point was Russia for a UK audience. Again, not that I'm the expert on it, but sort of that was, it very much felt like I sort of knew, okay, I don't think I need to have Russian actors. I don't think that's what this play is. I think it's three storytellers who could be from anywhere trying to figure out how to tell the story that, maybe they even have a distance to, and then trying to figure out with a room of people who probably mainly don't quite know that world. And so for that reason, that was never part of the process. But yeah, and it's interesting. I wonder how it would land and how the rhythm would change, and yeah, what the experience of the audience would be. I really don't know, but yeah, exciting. Let's do it.